Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Self-Reg show. I'm Susan Hopkins, and I'm happily sitting on my deck. It's a sunny May day, and I'm just taking advantage of enjoying the lovely weather. And I'm here with Cathy Lethbridge. Welcome, Cathy.
How are you? I wish I was sitting on my desk. I can just look out the window and see the sunshine here.
Yeah, it's not the same, trust me. So I feel very lucky. Actually, it's gorgeous out here. So I'm really excited to have you here today as part of the Self-Reg show. Do you know you're actually our first official guest on the podcast ever? True. It's just been Stuart and me so far, So it feels very fitting that we're starting with you. So thank you for joining me. So
Well, I'm honored to be the first guest.
So before we dive into our topic today, which is really about your lessons learned as a self-reg or someone with, I know you wouldn't use the language expertise, but I would, considerable expertise. You've been learning with Stuart for some time and definitely walking your talk in all kinds of different ways and roles, personally and professionally. But it's a little bit about your journey this year as going into a new school as an experienced principal, but a new school to as back to a school as a new principal, and seeing what happened as you tried to bring self-reg or infuse self-reg into the work you did, what your lessons learned were. So we're going to talk about that. But before we do, can you tell folks a little bit about you and your maybe a little bit about your journey? Who is Cathy Lethbridge?
I guess the journey started, well, I don't know, almost 8 years ago now, and I was in a school and had started sort of learning about the importance of self-regulation, that move away from, you know, consequences directed, that was somehow going to magically change behavior, and was looking for something different. And I had done a lot of work with occupational therapists who were helping us to understand about self-regulation. And then one day I stumbled across a presentation that Stuart was doing that was one of the other school boards in Ontario that had him, and there were people tweeting and putting up information from Stuart's slide deck. And it was at that moment, it was like, wow, here's the guy who's got the science. He's talking about science behind something that I had, believed for a long time that we were missing the mark, that we were never really able to find a carrot big enough or a stick big enough to get things to happen the way we wanted to in schools. And so it was really the start of a journey to move forward from that reactionary stance that we often have in schools to setting up an environment where everybody is more regulated and more ready to learn. And that's really what it's all about, is helping people to be in their best place to be both teaching and learning.
Yeah. Now, how many years have you been in education?
37.
37. So if I do the math, that's a lot of kids and families'
Yeah,
lives that have passed.
lots of kids, lots of families.
Yeah. And now and how many years as a principal?
20 years as an administrator, so vice principal and principal.
Yeah. And then you spent some time in a board position, but you were also a teacher as well, right?
Yeah.
The whole range of things. Well, very good. So let's maybe take everyone back to how this all started. It was sort of an informal decision that you and me, as I mean, we're colleagues and we've worked, learned together with Self-Reg, but we've become friends over the years as well, And I knew you were going back to a role as a principal, and I say back because there was some, you did something in between being a principal, and you were looking forward to it. I still remember that you were saying you were looking forward to it, but it was really a fascinating opportunity to take all the knowledge that and the things that you've learned and begin to try to apply them in, I don't know if the real world is a little bit too, but, to reality, which is messier than what it might be when we sit and plan separately. So you and I got talking last summer and said, well, let's record a monthly talk, which has turned out to be probably every 2 months or so, but let's have a conversation about the journey and 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 what it's been like and what you learned and see what we come up with along the way, because ideally, and I'm convinced of this, there's probably some lessons that you've learned, some things that you can share that will help other people that are new administrators or trying to bring a little more self-reg in, or teacher leaders. That was sort of the idea, that this might be able to help someone. So what do you remember about last August, I think, when we had our, so 8, 9 months ago, we had our first conversation. You had met your staff, but we hadn't, and you have, Self-Reg was just one piece of it. You have a million pieces, so that's another factor to really, Self-Reg was a piece of it, or maybe it was just that you're going in as a Self-Regger. I'm not sure if that's a way to think about it. But if you think back to August, how did you look at your role as a new principal, and like what were some of the thoughts that were going through your mind as you were trying to figure out how to plan your year, where to start, what your priorities would be?
Well, I think that it's really important to get to know your people, and that was a big part of my entry plan, and it the building of the relationships. And I think that the one thing that over the course of the years that we've always talked about, it's all about relationships. We talk about that in education all the time, right? That's a common theme that we hear. And what I've realized over the last few years is that self-reg as a framework is something that gives us the ability to build those relationships, even when the relationships are hard. And it's not as simple as just saying, you need to build relationships. You need to build relationships with your most challenging students and families and staff, but rather that you want to build relationships with everyone, but the framework really provides for an opportunity for that.
Yeah, and sorry everyone, those of you watching the video version saw I changed seats. It got very sunny and hot very quickly. So yeah, and it's interesting when I think about relationships, because that's a word that we've talked about. I mean, I've been in education since, I guess, the mid 90s, starting as a student, but it was always relationships, relationships, relationships. And everybody goes, yeah, relationships, relationships. But what does that actually mean? And I always love how Stuart has given this, for me, he's given the science, because he's talking about, the interbrain and attunement, and the very fact that there's a synchrony going on, or that synchrony is not there. And all of a sudden you begin thinking, moving away from just saying, oh, I have a relationship with someone, to saying, do I have that kind of, that connection, that synchrony, that if I look, you feel that, right? And it's not easy to do, especially I would think going into a new school. You're walking into an existing school. Sometimes starting something brand new could be easier than walking into existing, because you've got existing culture and the ways of doing things. So like, what were some of your best strategies, for lack of a better word, of building those relationships with your team?
Well, I think that one of the things that you have to come in with a stance of trusting
Yeah.
other people. And I know we've talked about that a lot, about that people need to feel trusted, whether it's the grade 3 student that has behavior difficulties and needs to feel that sense of being trusted, or whether it's the longtime teacher that's been in the school that, has had a variety of experiences along the way. You're coming in as the new person. And when you come in with that belief that everybody is bringing their best selves to the table, and that when there's, you know, breakdowns in the relationship, that it's not those things that happen because we know the science behind it. I think that's where, you know, that the brain science is so important, right? For us to understand that these are not, you know, behaviors that people are purposely doing. If there's something that goes wrong, it's not a behavior that people have plotted to do.
Yeah.
And that's a big shift. That's, you know, that's that reframing of people's behavior that is, you know, really, I think, gets you so much further in any relationship, but especially when you're managing a whole group of new relationships with staff, with students, with families. That when you are, you know, when things go wrong, and they will go wrong, because whether it's, you know, you yourself, and I, you know, I have an example of one day where I was obviously had a bunch of stressors pinging off of one another, and there was a teacher walked into my office, and I was really short with her, and she had there was like absolutely no reason that that she, like, she had no way deserved what
Mm-hmm.
she got when she walked into my office. And so after the fact, I sent her an email, and I apologized, and
Yeah.
I, you know, sort of put the, you know, like, I wasn't justifying my behavior, but I was, you know, sort of giving that, you know, self-reg perspective as to, and apologizing for how I had approached her in that situation. And it was interesting because then she said, you know, first of all, she really appreciated me doing that. And then the other was, she said, it really got me thinking about, you know, which of my students do I need to reach out to, because I may have done something similar. You know, they might have just been in the getting the response from her stress in the classroom or whatever. And it really, it was impactful.
Yeah.
And so that is something that's, you know, I think important to know that when people start to learn about how much our brains impact what's happening, and that we're not, you know, that really, very few people come to work or to school to be a problem or to cause problems or whatever. And if we can understand that there's science behind it, and we can learn that, you know, by working along with the science and working with our bodies, and using the Self-Reg framework, that we can all be in a better place for teaching and working and learning. And it really seems to work well. I think the thing that to me has really, over the course of this year, and I think it's based on, you know, some more learning about self-reg, but then that real life, you know, being immersed in a new environment, is the importance of co-regulation.
Yeah.
It's just, it's, you know, that critical factor. And then that, of course, goes right back to my longstanding belief that unless we help our adults to be well and self-regulated, we're really, you know, in the beginning, I thought, you know, we would start with kids. In my previous school, you know, you start doing self-reg for kids,
Mm-hmm.
but until you really bring the adults in and help them to be self-regulated through the framework, it's really hard. You'll make small impacts with individual students, but if you really want to make the big impact, it's the adults that you need to
Yeah.
reach.
Take care of the people who take care of the people, right?
That's
So,
right,
you know,
exactly.
you said an awful lot there. It's interesting when you talk about saying sorry to the teacher that you were short with. And that in a way is a form of, you talked about trust, but that's a form of trusting another person with your vulnerability. And so many, like a lot of educators, for example, especially new teachers, I find, you know, we've all mentored new teachers, or as many of us have, I guess, and they're always afraid of what happens if they lose control, right? And this myth that we, you know, we can't show any signs of vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is weakness, but vulnerability is strength, and it's trust. And I'm trusting you with sharing this. And it's a way of connection with other people too, right? Because it also reminds them, oh, you're human. You can know a lot of this science and you're still going to have days that you're short with people, right? Because we're human. We absolutely are. So tell me so you talked about co-regulation as the key. So how do you define or think about co-regulation?
Well, I think that in an education setting, that co-regulation starts in the principal's office. And, you really do need to be applying the self-reg strategies for yourself as the administrator of the school, because ultimately, it's that, it affects your entire building.
Yeah.
And so by living that, and, you're not going to be perfect at it. Like, we know that's, self-reg isn't the magic bullet that solves every problem that's coming our way, but for us to work through and using the framework, because there's such power in that framework um to be well
Yeah.
in our, and to keep digging for those stressors that are, because there's, in these roles, there's, an infinite number of stressors, but lots of them that we can make some adjustments to and to reduce them, so that we're ready to manage those ones that we can't, we have no control over, and
Yeah.
we have to work through. So that's, that modeling for the other adults in the building, that they too need to do the things they need to do in order to reduce their stress. And so they are, better regulated, so that they can then be able to pass that on to the students that they're co-regulating with.
So a lot of talk everywhere about self-care. I think it's kind of especially come out of the COVID era, but so many stressed out educators and principals. There's lots of stuff around administrators as well. But a lot of talk around it. And, I did a presentation once somewhere, and they didn't realize the mic was hot when I was, when we were starting, and they it was actually very helpful. The two teachers were having a conversation that I don't think they realized that I could hear about, oh, they better not tell me to go and, take some deep breaths and, and then give me this slew of paperwork to do, right? So it was this idea that, oh, we're telling them to do self-care by adding on some, I don't know, mindfulness activity or whatever, or a cute little note in your mailbox at work, which they might be nice, but you're adding that on, and nothing else is changing, and that's supposed to be self-care. So, how did, and I know that's not, well, that's not what we think in self-reg, and that's not the approach. I'm just wondering, for those listening, thinking, okay, well, what do you do? Like, what does it look like when you help your people take care or reduce their stress over the school year and over a busy school year? So what kind of things did you do?
So I think a lot of the messaging that, coming in, this is coming back post-COVID. So coming into a new to me school, post-COVID, everything was starting up, and educators being educators, for the most part, people are feeling safer and freer now, and they come back and they just want to ramp everything back up to the way it was before. And when we think about all of the extra things that educators do on a regular basis, and I'm in no way suggesting minimalism in education, but I am suggesting that I often said to my staff that COVID was our circuit breaker. It was our opportunity to take a step back and look at those things that we're doing because we feel obliged to do, those extra things. I mean, there are things that we obviously are contractually required to do. We can't decide we're not going to do report cards because we think that they're too stressful or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's many things that we do that add to the stress load, that are not necessarily, in some cases, they're not necessarily even being appreciated by others, or in some cases, they're actually the things that we've felt obliged to do are actually increasing the stress loads of other people. So case in point, so a number of events that schools hold that parents are invited to, and as a parent, you feel obligated to attend. The staff feel the pressure to perform, to present, to provide. And at the same time, we have families that are feeling overstretched, getting back into things after COVID. And so we were very strategic in our planning, and we decided to have one big event that was going to showcase many of the things that we might have in previous years showcased individually, so that instead of parents having depending on how many students in the school they have, instead of having to come out a number of times, we've been able to provide an evening that's a smorgasbord of things for people to experience, but not feeling that same obligation to be out at the school 3 or 4 or 5 times during the school year. And that same with the staff, it means that they're not having that same intensity. And in the same way, it's still providing for those opportunities for parents to get into the school. They were given lots of advance notice of the dates, so that they could kind of work their schedules around it to be able to be available. It's coming up next week, and we're pretty excited about what that's going to hold for the school community. It's been something everybody's worked on together, both the staff, but also the school council and members of the community have come together to make this sort of a focused event, as opposed to a number of smaller ones, which sometimes do cause us we just feel like we're as parents that we're running this way and that way, trying to get to all the extracurricular activities that have started up, as well as those events that are being offered at the school. There's still lots of other sporting events and those kinds of things, and if their children are involved, those things are still happening. But as far as coming out to some of the events that previously we might have had as individual events, we've consolidated them into one family evening.
And so what I'm hearing from a self-reg lens, so some of you might hear that and say, oh, that means my school needs to have just one intense focused event. No, maybe, but not necessarily. What you're saying is that you're using, for me, I can sort of using self-reg to realize, okay, the staff are tired. People are tired. People are, there's some of the families are getting, then they feel guilty they're not coming to them all, and we're sort of scattered. And it is a year. Last year was, I found, worse maybe, but this year people are still tired, and so how can I do this? And so we go deeper and we do more quality, make a bigger event, and then it's less stress on everybody because it's one event and not multiple. So it's really kind of an interesting solution, because but the key is it's the thinking that went into it. You involved other people, you got other people's input, you tried to be aware what some of the tensions might have been, and came up with a solution. But it's also for your stress too. You're not having to manage multiple evenings a month or what have you. So am I capturing that right? Or
yeah, I think it's a matter of looking at what are the stressors that people are experiencing. And I think that as educators, we can sort of, we know what some of our school and external stressors are, but I think sometimes we forget about what it feels like to be a parent and not being able to be out to all of the events and things that we that we might be offering up, because there's that sense of, if it's being offered, I feel like I'm like, as a parent, I'm obliged to be there. I have that sense, and this way it's there's not that same intensity.
and we don't get stuck in our how we've always done it. We think about what's our purpose, to provide some community building and reconnecting. And it is also after the COVID, we've gone from no events. So anyway, I think it's a really, really neat experience. So you said it's coming up next week, is
Yeah.
it? Yeah, neat. So tell me I'm going to ask you, I've given you the heads up on this one, that I'm going to ask you for some lessons learned that maybe uh, what you might want to share with other principals or other school leaders or anyone looking to try to bring more self-reg into the schools, what some of your experience has led to. But I'm curious before we go there, did you have any moments along the way this year that that those unplanned moments? Of course, there's the infusion of a bit of self-reg learning that you try to do with a little bit of extra time that you have with your team. But a lot of it just happens through relationships, experience, what happens in a moment. Did you have any kind of aha moments along the year? Any um, I don't know if you call it mindset shifts or any kind of those real moments um, where someone learned self-reg, whether you brought up the language or not, sort of learned how you use the framework maybe and how it could make a difference for someone? Moments with kids, moments with staff, moments with some of the problems that you're trying to solve, things that came in.
I think that, that the word self-regulation has been, around for a while in our schools. And so I think that, sort of for some people who have had maybe a less than positive experience of self-regulation, not self-reg, but self-regulation, that you get a certain response to, sort of, well, we've already done that and it didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And certainly, there were a few people in the, that I gave an opportunity for, some feedback coming in, sort of an entry plan. And there you could tell that there were a few people who, sort of knew that I was the person who'd been, teaching about and doing staff development on self-reg for the last 5 years in the board. And, so there was sort of that, sort of that hesitancy of, well, I guess there were two camps. So, well, that's great. You're going to come here and, bring self-reg. The other was, well, we've already done it and we don't want to do it again. So I think it's there were, those groups that you have to keep working away with both groups, because the one group thought that you were just going to bring the magic wand and you were going to wave the self-reg magic wand and everything was going to be perfect. And then the other is still the ones that are sort of resistant to the idea because they've had a bad experience, whatever that whatever that bad experience looks like that had the name self-regulation attached to it. So because you and I both know that self-reg is so individualized, and what works for you doesn't necessarily work for me, and it doesn't work for all the kids in one class, and it certainly doesn't work for the 500 people in the building. And it's that very personalized approach to self-regulation, and I think that that's been a big learning, because I think the sort of the standard way of approaching self-reg is sort of self-regulation, not self-reg. Self-regulation is, that idea that, well, we'll all just do yoga, or we'll all just do, mindful breathing or whatever, and we'll all be fixed.
Yeah, or I'll bring out these colored
Yeah.
cards or whatever. Yeah.
Right. And so when we can move beyond that and realize that, within the self-reg framework, that there's so much more involved in that. And, especially when we get to, step 5 with restoration, that really, we really have to look at the way we do things in our school to make sure that people are having opportunities to restore during the course of the school day, in whatever manner that looks like, because what we can't guarantee is what's happening once people leave our school building. So
Yeah.
we can't make the assumption that people are going to be able to have opportunities to restore once they leave our building. And this is whether we're talking about kids or adults, it doesn't matter. So, just having that as sort of when you're thinking about things. And I think that comes back to that idea of overscheduling, that, sometimes we get so caught up in, what we've always done, that we just want to keep, well, we used to do this and we used to do this and let's do this. And, we get caught up in that, trying to reignite everything. And, it's, just is that offering the opportunity that we want it to be, or is it just adding to the stress load? And we have to, and then,
Yeah.
like we can look at positive stress too, like some of those things are positive stress,
Yeah.
but they still have an effect on the amount of energy that we have, and to be
Yeah.
able to handle all the other things we have to do.
Yeah, how we show up. Yeah, absolutely. So I gave you this, I asked you to reflect on some lessons learned, and just things that might be able to share from your journey this last year, 8 months, and to see if, what might resonate for somebody else out there trying to figure this out or on their own journey. Do you want to share what those are? I'm really interested to know what some of your ahas were this year.
I think that we have to remember that wherever we are on our self-reg journey, that we have to remember that not everybody else is at the same point in the journey,
Hmm.
because we don't want to, think that, we're going to give them the crash course in self-reg and they're just going to get it, because, many of us that have been learning about self-reg for a number of years, we've all been on a journey. We all have new learning as we've gone along, and some of us have gone deeper, and others have maybe only learned a little bit about it. But whether you've only learned a little bit about it or you've really gone deep, there's still components of it that we
Hmm.
can use to really make an impact in our classrooms and our schools and so on. But we have to accept that not everybody is going to, it doesn't matter what the topic is, because in education, there's always lots of things we're learning about, and there's only so much time and brain capacity for people to learn. So we have to make sure that what we're sharing with people is something that's going to be impactful in their lives, so that they can see that, that shift in, something as, one step of the framework, the reframing of stress behavior is like, it's, just that one little step, but it's like it's the most dramatic step
Hmm.
as far as shifting thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting too that we overuse the word respect, and we so much so that I feel uncomfortable using it with kids, and you show respect and blah blah blah. But the truth is, when we realize that people are at different places on the journey, but they also are bringing, um, they have different backgrounds, different histories, different experiences, and all sorts of things that are related to understanding stress and self-regulation, and all that it's linked to, mental health and safe schools and all these sorts of different areas. And that it's just respect for it's honestly trust as well, but allowing people to be where they're at.
Yeah.
You could, bonk somebody over the head with it. I've tried with the articles, and it doesn't work, right? People have to come to it and want to, but it's also not honoring that they have the right to work through their journey in their own kind of way, right? So,
Mhm.
so I like that. So next, what's next on your list? I've got three to share, but you may already get to them ahead of me.
Oh.
So
Is this like a test that I'm supposed to remember what they
no,
were?
no tests.
But again, I go back, like, and this, like, it's not an aha, it's just a reaffirmation about the importance of supporting our adults.
Yeah.
That, that unless we are supporting our adults in their self-reg journey, then we're going at it the hard way rather than the easy way. If we're trying just to, if we're only going to offer self-reg to students, which we can. I mean, that was how I started years ago in my school. Was we were going to start with the kids, and it was like this slogging that just was so slow. And then it was, that time I was taking the courses, and suddenly, I mean, I remember the moment in time where, you have that realization of, we're starting with the wrong people here.
It was F3. I remember you were like, "Woo,
Yeah,
adults."
F3, exactly.
Yeah,
Foundations 3. And
yeah,
it was like this moment in time where it's like, there's where we are, and I'm not going to say where we're making our mistake, because that sounds kind of harsh, but
yeah,
that was huge learning then, and it continues to be reinforced at every turn
yeah,
of, when our adults are, and we can't control all the things that are going on in people's lives outside of our building. We can help them, by messaging around how they, like the things that they can do that are, within the rules, and that they can support their own restoration and stress reduction. And like I said before, I mean, we can't say, well, you don't have to do report cards because they're causing you stress.
yeah,
And, we're not moving that child out of your class because, they're causing you stress. But there's lots of ways that we can support when it comes to, maybe it's, adjusting hand-in dates for report cards a certain time. The vast majority of people, make the deadlines, and there's a few people that need some additional time. It's a, I guess you'd call it a steps 3, reduce the stress. It's a really small thing, but I've used it for a number of years, and I've never ever had us miss getting report cards. I've never had a bunch of kids go home saying, "Oh, well, the teacher didn't get the report cards done." We've
yeah,
always gotten them home, right?
yeah,
And so there's lots of ways to adjust things to, do that, stress reduction.
yeah,
But it's a matter of being conscious of it and realizing that, there's, different things impacting people's abilities, and because their stress loads are different.
yeah,
And then,
absolutely.
so yeah, so it's not a new aha. I mean, for people that are, have been on the self-rate journey and changed schools, I think the big aha for me was that, you can't expect your new school that hasn't been on a self-rate journey to be where your last school was when you left.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's been, even in the last while, really realizing that, like where your school gets to when self-reg is the focus of how you do business,
yeah,
and you get to a certain point, things change,
yeah,
and people get along better, and kids get along better, and things get done, and there's, less tension in the building, and all of those things, that you go back to, when you and Stuart always, Stuart always said, you can feel a self-reg haven when you walk in. You know it's a self-reg haven. It's hard to sort of
mhm,
definitively define what it is, but he said, you can feel it, right?
yeah,
And you can't expect to just say, well, I had, the makings of a self-reg haven in my previous school, so I'm going to walk in and I arrive, and suddenly that's going to be the focus, because it grows as people learn to apply the 5 steps.
yeah,
And
and
it starts with that reframing of behavior, because we're still being taught in teachers college or whatever that kids do stuff on purpose, and you either need to reward or punish it in order to change the behavior. And it's a big step for, an adult to realize that, we don't have to create a win and lose situation. and that actually things turn out much better for everybody if we don't set it up quite like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're reminding me of another a member, another principal, and a member of the team is Kim, who has been she's a retired principal, but she goes and does a short contracts, I think, at a number of different schools, and she has a lot of self-reg knowledge as well. And she says that every school is different, and so she arrives with what she knows.
Yeah.
But no two have gone the same way in really kind of different ways. So that's kind of really an interesting way of thinking about it. So do you have any other ahas? Are those your three big ones, or are there more?
I think it's that and it's, again, it's not an aha because I've known it for a long time, but self-reg works.
Yeah.
And I remember Stuart, there's been points in courses and in presentations where he says, that there isn't anybody that self-reg doesn't work for. And it's true.
Yeah.
And I think that, just when you have a new school and you start applying the strategies and supporting people, through the strategies, you just have further proof that, yeah, it does work.
So what do you
And
say to people who hear you say that, hear you say it works, and they're assuming that you mean it's a program, or okay, well, how does it work? Well, how do you answer when someone says, yeah, well, we tried that. We put a calming corner in our classroom, and I don't know, we have a rain stick instead of a bell for our transitions, and we practice deep breathing. We tried it and it doesn't work. What do you say to that?
so I think that what it is I, let them know that they only have little tidbits that don't make up the whole framework. And they're missing like all of those things that you just described can all fit into supporting a school to be a more self-reg place. But those things in and of themselves are not the solution, like, like if you, like, I mean, I'll give you an example of something that supports the self-reg in our building. And the regulation of everybody in the building is we are very conscious of the number of times we use our walkie-talkies and or our public address system during the course of the school day. And it's, there was a period of time where some people were starting to slip back into using it when, it was, there were other means that wouldn't necessarily be, that jarring response, that everybody is subjected to. And we know that, for some of us, that the walkie-talkie going off, or the blast of the of an announcement coming over is just enough to, cause our stress load to go up. And so it's just a very tiny example, but in and of itself, limiting walkie-talkie calls and announcements, it's only like one tiny piece, but it's that awareness of the effect of things on people, and that there are some people it matters to and other people it doesn't affect them. But
Yeah.
it's a good jumping off place to talk about, other things that are, like concerning about, that are stressors that we do actually have control over.
We do something about the things that we can. It's like that's what I like about the stress cycle, is there's lots of things I can't change, but
Yep.
there's stressors in all five domains. So that's biological, emotion, cognitive, social, and pro-social. And lots of things I can't change, nor necessarily your example of report cards would you want to. My kid doesn't want to go to school. Well, school's important, right? So I'm not going to, we're not trying to bubble wrap. It's the exact opposite. But what are the ones we can change that don't actually add any value, and they're like your examples of ways you're lightening the load, just even little bits on teachers and how it makes around report cards and how it makes a difference. So it's kind of like the reverse with, we always say people always focus on what the kid did before he punched the other kid, or before they, I don't know, took off out of the school or whatever they did, a child did. And we focus on that, they'll use the language of the trigger, that last little, but that's just the Jenga, that's just the Jenga peg when everything went down, right? Or the volcano, whatever. It's really, that's a, that's just a small piece of the puzzle. There was a whole lot more going on, and it works both ways, right? So
Yeah,
I have a few ahas for you. Would you like to hear mine, or do you want to keep going?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I started with three and I may have grown them, so that as happens, because it's just so interesting hearing your reflections. So one of the big ahas that I had, just going through this experience with you, and all I am really is listening and kind of learning and asking questions and reflecting with you along the way. We've probably done maybe 8 hours of conversations over a year. Is that from the very beginning, you focused on uh, everyone. So it was like a whole school, whole community. You were thinking, you started today talking about your relationships, but it really was like that. And there was I don't know if you realize this, but you started with with a sense of calm. It wasn't some like it was, no, this is everybody, and I've got how to really um build relationships, but it was more like building connections and a unity around the school. And one of the second ones so that was one that was just was always about everyone. The second one was sort of a surprise for me, but it was just a really good reminder. When we first met, I remember preparing some stuff for you, and I gave it to you. Like, I was just trying to think, what can I contribute? And it's like, okay, this is where I might start. And it all sounded good. You may have used, there are things that you may have used from, I don't know, courses or from the handbook, or like you may have used some of that content, but it all sounded great. Okay, I'm going to, we're going to learn some self-reg together. And it just doesn't work that way, right? You might infuse little tidbits here and there. But what I noticed, and I've never told you this because I've been waiting to save it till the very end, is in every one of our meetings after that, what you told me about were these moments. You told me about, sometimes in detail, sometimes just very high level, but these, game-changing moments where it's just like you're kind of walking through the world with this framework, but that just means a series of wonderings and questions, and a belief there's something more, and seeing things differently, but then helping other people see them differently. So it was like Stuart has this. I used to reach out to him and feel so kind of overwhelmed him. Oh my God, we've got so much more to do, and it was one this. So he has this mantra of this. We start with whoever's in front of us, and so you really did that. And I don't even know if you realize that, but you're bringing people along, not with an ego kind of way, but you're one conversation at a time, one situation at a time, one thing we resolve at a time. So that was kind of really interesting because where I started when I was trying to think about, okay, what could I do? What could I contribute to this dialogue? It was very much um, starting at sort of more top down, and this was really more of nurturing the roots. But you got to have the eyes and the heart to see them, and to notice all those, to notice those moments. So that was one of the things that I noticed. Another one is that you have a lot of humility. So I think people probably already picking that up about you. Um, but with humility there's a lot of strength as well. So I don't want people to think that because you're self-reg that there's no boundaries. There are boundaries. There are, yeah, that's not happening. And there are moments that, like, I know you had to make some decisions that like, you're not always, as a principal, you have to not always be the most popular person, because you make three people happy, other people sad or whatever, upset or whatever. And you just kind of walk through that. And it is with strength and confidence. And I think you spend a lot of time, um, one of the things I think I picked up from you is a lot of time mulling really important changes and decisions. You put a lot of time into thinking about how fast, and how leaving things in certain ways so as to not dysregulate the team, and really trying to take everybody's best interest in mind, but also making the decisions that you needed to do. So it was that combination of that yes, boundaries, and yes, no, we're not doing that. And, there were certain um, 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 things that you put in place and made very clear, but then you were also approachable. And I mean, you've told me a number of stories of people, sharing things and coming to you and beginning to ask questions, and that takes that humility, to not be the sage on the stage, and yet to have the confidence to kind of sit back, the principal version of the sage on the stage. So that's another thing that I noticed. Um, and uh, and I guess the only other one that kind of came to mind, as I'm hearing you, as I'm listening to you here today, is this idea that you that self-reg, we're using it to look at everything you do. You once said to me early on, we've got to get to curriculum because it's what we're a school too, right? And so how do we, um, it's a piece of things, but we can't, you were worried about, I don't know, I think there were some classrooms were struggling with maybe younger children, I think maybe kindergarten children, but trying to sort of deal with all of these things. And um, it was that idea of helping people see that there was a path forward, that there was hope, and just beginning to, again, work your way through it one this at a time. So, and maybe helping them see, even if they didn't have the science or the language, helping them understand, see, that was actually self-reg. See, here's how I could explain that to you. Here's what just happened. Or, hey, look what you did, right?
Yeah,
You actually were a co-regulator in that moment. And, they might have been like co-regulator, but it's like that was co-regulation in action. Look at that. And look how
yeah.
how awesome that was. And trying to sort of amplify the voices of others. So those were some of my ahas, or some of the things I noticed, I guess, in learning with you and listening to you. Yeah. Any responses to any of those?
Your last comment, I think that empowering people to be the co-regulators, because really that really isn't what we're taught to do in school when we learn to be educators. It's not part of really of what we learn to do, and we're not really reminded that going back to that parent and child sort of connection. We go from parenting a couple of kids to being the teacher of 20 or 30 or more. But individually, that relationship between the adult and the child in whatever role, and it's not just teacher role, but all of the roles within a school, that we have support staff in this school who are amazing co-regulators with some of our kids. And it's all of the adults play a role in that, and being able to see that, for them to see themselves in that role of, that if they can see themselves in the role of co-regulator, and that child has, it's I know that a lot of times recently we had that idea that we needed to, that every child needed to have one trusted adult in the building, and we got into patterns where we would, we'd have a staff meeting, and all this, names of the kids would be
Systemize
up,
that.
and
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it was people were trying to operationalize a concept. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is, what happens when that person isn't available for the child. And so we want their co-regulators to be broader than just having one adult who says that they know the kid and the kid knows them and that sort of thing. But the idea that so many different adults in their reaction can co-regulate with a child, even if they don't have they don't have to have a massive relationship with the child. It's more about the way they're responding to the child, and that has to start with
Yeah.
the reframing of behavior. Because if a child is running away down the hall, and you're responding to that as they're misbehaving, rather than reframing it as, and asking the questions why and why now, and then going into that co-regulator mode as opposed to the enforcer of the rule or the reminder of the school rules, which at that point, the dysregulated child really is not benefiting from you, being the reminder of the rules.
Well, and
And
ironically, it works better too, like that's the piece that we miss, that being the enforcer, the carrots and sticks, it doesn't change. It's not necessarily changing how busy the revolving door of our office is, or the amount of things that we're dealing with. And a compassionate, humane and caring approach that's grounded in science actually begins to shift some of these things. It doesn't, like you said, it doesn't solve everything. But it's like you're dialing down a valve, right? Little by little by little, and over time, and building capacity in at the same time. So I cut you off. I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to do that. So I'm a new podcast host. Bear with me, everybody. I get excited. Well, the final word is yours, Cathy. What would you, like everyone to know who's on this journey as a school leader or somebody that's trying to go bring in a little more self-reg into their school or in any context? What would you like them to know?
I think it's important that people know that, like, as I said earlier, that self-reg works. It will work in your building, no matter how dysregulated your building seems today. It's not going to make everything perfect overnight by any means. But if you're willing to, first of all, start with yourself and really dig in to your own self-regulation, because you, as the leader of the building,
Mm-hmm.
you're setting the weather in the building.
Yep.
And it's, if you're able to do that, if you're able to use the framework to help yourself be in a more regulated state, then you're impacting all of the people that are working in your building. And in turn, those people, as you, because I mean, lots of adults are already well regulated, and they're already lending their calm
Mm-hmm.
to students. And of course, then there's days when, even a well-regulated person,
Oh yeah.
enough things happen and they're not.
Yeah.
And being able to bounce back from that, and but as providing that opportunity, it will turn the temperature of your building down, no matter you know, how hot you feel your building is at the moment.
Yeah.
But it takes time. It's
Yeah.
not an overnight fix, but we didn't get to where we are overnight either. It takes time to change the direction of things.
Well, thank you very much, Cathy Lethbridge. It's been enlightening. I look forward to learning more with you. Those of you that are coming to the Self-Reg Summer Symposium, Cathy's going to be giving a talk on her journey, and you heard a few gems she may be speaking about, but with some about really the lessons learned on this. The rubber meets the road, I think, is what we're calling it. And but you can also participate if you can't make it to Ontario to join us. You can also, you'll be able to see Cathy's luminary will be live streamed as well. So I invite you to come and join us. And thanks very much. Feel free to. We'd love to hear responses to this podcast. If you have questions for Cathy, I'll make sure she gets them. And with that, thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.